Yes.
The 1 o'clock. The 11:45 to 1.
No, it's stick to 150.
1:15.
150. Well, it's very exciting to have a live class, I have to say, with all the wonderful auras in the background of people who are seeing something. I'm afraid I can't relate to the people on screen very much because I can't see you. My eyes are not good enough just to see from a distance like that. But somehow we'll manage. In general, in case you're not used to my way of teaching, perhaps I should say that I like on the whole not to be interrupted. And I'll leave time at the end for questions, unless it's questions of understanding. In other words, if I'm saying something you just don't understand, then let me know, and I'll be very happy to stop. But if it's interesting thoughts that you have, or substantial questions, try to keep it to the end. And I hope I'll learn your names. That's another problem. Okay, so I've called this series with some bravado, the Torah as Shirah. And I want to start by putting down the technical basis for that idea. Where did that idea come from? But the Torah is called Shirah. That is, it's quite a large statement, big claim. Not just the poetic passages in the Torah. Poetic passages in the Torah, of course, are Shirah. Shirat Hayam, yeah, the Song of the Sea, other. But the prose passages, everything, the laws, everything is called Shirah. Now, where does that come from? I'm going to translate. I'm going to beg a lot of questions. I'm not going to try and set down a fully scientific, empirical basis for what I'm going to talk about. That is to define Shirah. What is? I'm going to understand it as poetry rather than song. Okay. There is shir and the shirah, and in a different kind of class, there will be an attempt to distinguish between them. But in the class that I'm hoping to give, which will evolve over our time together, I'm hoping that as we continue looking at more and more examples, more and more passages, we'll begin to get a sense of what I mean by Shirah. That I have a sort of personal understanding of Shirah, which is fed not only by what our writers have written about the concept of Shirah, the Hebraic concept of Shirah, but what poets have written in English literature, in American literature, about the poetic, including the modern and postmodern periods, which interest me particularly, because that's where sentimental views of Shirah receive a kind of real interrogation. Sentimentality is somewhere given a hard time. Sure, you can't just go ecstatic and starry-eyed. Oh, that's poetry. That's not what I'm looking for. I'm looking for some sense of what distinguishes the poetic from the prosaic, let's say, and how then we can talk about the whole Torah as Shirah. Well, that's a big claim. So I'm starting with a pasuk that you can see in number 1 on your page. You have the source page. And this is also a apology warning. In the English versions of the sources, you'll find that instead of the numbers going on consecutively, 1, 2, 3, 4, the first 2 are numbers 1, 2, and then we start again, 1, 2, 3, 4. This is because I added on the first 2 to a previous source page, and then we couldn't find a way of handling it because it was a photograph. I don't know. So if you're looking at the English, be aware that when I say any number, take away 2, subtract 2. So it will keep you on your toes. Here is the pasuk at the end of Sefer Dvarim. It's actually the last mitzvah in the Torah. With this mitzvah, the Torah ends. Of course, it goes on a bit longer. It's not. It's only chapter 31, but that's the end of the mitzvot, the last mitzvah. And by way of leading up to it, I wanted to include the previous verse. Anochi haster astir panai vayom hahu. On that day of cataclysm, of disaster, of catastrophe, the curses, the terrible periods. I will indeed hide my face, God says. Haster, astir, et panai. Now there's a metaphor. That's a baneful metaphor. I'll call hara'a asher asa, because of all the evil that he has done, that is, the people have done. Ki pana el Elohim aherim, in turning to other gods. And that's just the kind of the ending of the previous passage. And it's that terrible idea of God's hiding his face. It's a kind of metaphysical idea. It's not really about human beings, it's about God and his face. Or what will we see of God? We'll only see his back, we won't see his face. I don't want to get that off there. But then we suddenly come, it seems like a sharp shift. Va'ata, and now, business. Now is a mitzvah, not a prediction, now is a commandment. Kitvu lachem et hashira hazot. Write down this song. So it's a mitzvah to write the words of this song to the children of Israel, put it in their mouths in order that it shall be, this song shall be to me as a witness against or for the children of Israel. I'm not going to go into that just now. There are different views, different readings. And then the question is, what is this shira that you're to write down as the last commandment? You're to write it lachem, for your own use. Kitvu lachem. It's true, it's in the plural, but it's the plural that's applied. True, it's in the plural. I didn't make that out. Did anyone? No. Okay. It's an enigmatic call. We have a lot of enigma. Kitvu lachem, maybe it's addressed to Moshe and Aaron. Is it just they who are to write? And what are they to write? That's the question. The most obvious reading is, Parshat, is that it refers to the song that's we're just about to hear, which is Hashavua, Parshat Hashavua, the final song that Moshe speaks to the people and then writes down. That's the last commandment. But there is a healthy tradition, a robust tradition, as they say nowadays, which says no. Hashira which is repeated, the expression is repeated, and it's repeated 5 times in the course of the longer passage. Hashira hazot, Hashira hazot. It's a refrain. That's the way poetry works. But irrationally, evoking something that goes beyond the bare minimum of what you need to understand words. I understand. Once you said it once, I got it. No, 5 times, as if to say it's not so simple. And so the other view is, and you can find it in the Gemara in Sanhedrin, for instance, is this, that it refers to the whole Torah. It's a way of talking about the whole text of the Torah. Hashira hazot. And the commandment now is, and you know that each person, each man, each father of a family, has to write his own Sefer Torah, even if he's already inherited one from his ancestors. Let's say, his father had one and he passed it on to him. So he has one in the house, not for him. There has to be that act of writing the poetry, putting it in one's mouth and writing it for yourselves, of your own, mishelachem. You're going to write poetry out of yourself in a way. Now that's the bare bones of what is said in the Gemara and Sanhedrin. There's a lot to discuss there. Why would you have to write it? After all, you have your own. And one of the ideas that comes out is the mitzvah is that the Torah should titpashet. There should be more and more Sifrei Torah. It's an interesting material idea. It's materialistic. It's not, I don't mean in a negative sense. It's the idea we're focusing on a concrete Sefer Torah, not on the Torah. That there should be more of them. All right, you can inherit one, but in your life, you should write one. Now, we get away with not doing that. There are all kinds of ways in which we justify not doing that. But the concept remains important. What is that? What does it mean? Particularly, what do you mean by calling the Torah a shira? So, with this, I want to bring up the extraordinary suggestion of a 19th century commentary, right? It took a long time for this question to be discussed in this kind of conceptual way. Actually, I should take back what I just said. I don't know. Maybe it was discussed before and I just don't know about it. But in the 19th century, it was the end of the 19th century, the Hermit Davar, the Netziv of Volozhin, the Rosh Yeshiva of Volozhin, a Litvak, if you know what that means, someone who's not on the fanciful side of things, who's very much about legalities and concreteness and precision and so on, makes it his stock in trade. The idea of chidush, if you look at his commentary on the whole Torah, chidush is everywhere. It's one of the things that when I first encountered him, without warning, no one really told me that you should read that commentary. So I came across it innocently, and I was just so excited by this emphasis on the commandment l'chadesh. That's in general terms, and he has specific meanings for it, what he thinks that is. But in terms of this commandment, which is the last commandment in the Torah, in his introduction to the Torah, he has a very powerful introductory essay to the Torah, which is printed at the beginning of the 5 volumes of his commentary. In the 3rd section, if any of you want to look it up, he says this. He asks the question we've just asked, Torah, Shira. It's obvious that Torah is not written in the form of Shira. Shira has a classic form, which is, how can you tell without thinking about the meaning of the words too much? That was the form of the Torah of Shira.
Format.
It's a format which is parallelism. Yeah, I don't want to go off on that, but think of Shira Tayam. You give an idea in the first half, and then you give the same idea in the second half, but intensified. It's an intensification. That's about as simple as I can put it for the time being. But the whole Torah isn't written like that. So we can't be talking about the formalism. And he says it must be something to do with the poetic principle, with something that is essential to poetry, which is essential to Torah. And what he says then is this. If you read the Torah, the prose passages, you realize that it's not a nenu mevu'ar yafeh. The more I think about it, I think that's an intriguing way, negative way of describing how the Torah is written. It's not clearly explicated. It sounds like a criticism of the text of the Torah. After all, don't we want things to be clearly explicated? Instead, it's somehow elusive, mysterious. It covers up its meanings. There's something about the Torah that slips through your hands. You can read many psukim and have no idea what it's talking about. And that is of the nature of Torah, and it's of the nature of poetry. That poetry doesn't give itself away easily. Meanings are not understood on the spot. And there's something about the difficulty, that's one way of thinking about it, the difficulty of reading poetry. Although not all poetry is so difficult to read. But on the whole, I would dare to say that the poetry that's really easy to read, so you may run as you read, that is simple, is not the poetry that's the great poetry. There are probably exceptions to this. As to all the statements I'm going to be making, it's impossible to cover all bases. I want gradually to think about all these questions. But so what is this elusiveness? And he says, well, it's the way that poetic language works. It doesn't sell itself complete right away. Maybe there are other kinds of language, prosaic language, where the aim is simplicity. You want to get as simple as possible, as clear as possible. Generally, those texts are technical texts. They teach you how to do things, how to make things, how to do them. And you want to be very clear. But as soon as you move off into what you might just call simply a literary direction, not a poetic, but then you have a sense of the complexity of language, and that any word you use could have a whole range of meanings. We're going to be looking at this in some detail. And that if you know enough, and that's what he starts with, That's the beauty of being knowledgeable about Torah. Because if you're knowledgeable, then you know what Chazal say about the Psukim, and you know what the Hasidic writers say, and you have some sense of the range of interpretations that have been given to it. And there is a mitikut about that, of being in a state of knowledge, reading the obscure text of the Torah, somewhere knowledgeably translating as you go, and realizing that there's more than one meaning, which is very disturbing to some people. You know, I've had people accosting me in the park. I have to say, it happened quite recently. Really very troubled about this idea. Who knows? Who said that it means that? Just because you had a bright idea or someone had that's not what it says. Right? Why is the Torah written that way? Wouldn't you want it to be transparent? But here is the Hamek Davar blithely saying it's not transparent, and that is its virtue. It's not a catastrophe that it's not. It's actually the way poetry works. And then knowledge is very helpful. And there is a sweetness, if you are knowledgeable, about being able to master, you know, that range of meaning, which gives you a very full sense of what poetry is. The words begin to flicker. The words are not just plump on the page. We'll see an example in a minute. But there are ambiguities. Some people can tolerate that. Those are the poetic spirits. And some people find that very hard. It's interesting that the Hamek Davar emphasizes this. But the interesting thing also is that when he emphasizes knowledge, he almost seems to imply that the meanings of the words can be found in sources. Like if you have a proper set of footnotes, then you should understand the full meaning of the Torah, which is actually not the fullness of what he himself thinks. Because if you look at his commentaries throughout the Torah, you can see how often he's introducing personal readings, which you can't find in any authoritative source. And he feels quite legitimate. It's legitimate to do that. I would think perhaps one might say, before you begin to be original, you should have a sense of the tradition. No, maybe I'll change that. No, maybe not before. You know, you can start being original right away. You know, not everyone has that sense and has a good education. Some people come at it later. But I think the mature interpretation, put it like that, an interpretation that will speak perhaps to the generations, is one that is in some way made with a tactful sense of where the tradition was, what has been said. Now, let me try one. Basically, also what he's saying there, let's add one more word, is that the characteristic of poetry is, and he calls it in Hebrew, melitza. Melitza means really metaphor. Things that don't say what they mean. Words that don't say what they mean. My love is like a red, red rose. Yes, the hackneyed example I always give. My love is like a red, red rose, really? I can think of lots of ways in which that metaphor falls down. Yeah. Just watch, if you watch someone who has no poetic sense talking about a metaphor, you can just watch the metaphor collapsing under his hands. He has just no idea of the limits of metaphor, of its strengths and weaknesses, what it does. There are ways in which my love is like a red, red rose. There are distinctly ways in which she's not. So having sort of put it out there like that, what I wanted to do next is to give an example. Yeah, an example from his own commentary. And this is on last week's Parshat. So I'm happy to say something about the Parsha of creation before we get to the Parsha of destruction, which I hope to get to in just a few minutes. Parshat Noach, the flood. Just before the sin, Perek Bet, Pasuk Kaf Hei, just before the sin, before the third chapter, before we read, Vayu Shnehem Arumim, Adam ve'ishto, something like that. The two of them were naked, man and his wife, and they were not ashamed. That's the classic understanding of it. And the Hermit Davar points out, but you are misreading the literal text if you translate like that. Because the literal text is boshashu, yit boshashu. The root of that word is boshesh. You want to be very precise. Not bosh. The root bosh means shame. Boshesh means something apparently very different. Do you remember that word from anywhere? When is it used importantly? The people saw that Moshe was boshesh and coming down the mountain. Yes? Late. Late. Late, to be late, to be delayed. It's a strange concept to be late, to be the time lag of somewhere. Got time wrong, got timing wrong. And so the Hermit Davar has the courage to say, has the authority, I would say, to say, in the 19th century, to say what you have here is a mingling of two roots. When you read Vayit Boshashu, you should realize that's both Boshu, they were not ashamed, and they were not delayed. What could that mean? Suddenly it becomes a puzzle. They were naked and they were not delayed. And then he reads like this. It's a very complex idea, which I'll try to simplify because I don't want to get stuck there. He says, Adam and Chava in the Garden of Eden, what marked them out as different from us was a kind of innocence, right? That's a classic idea. But he doesn't emphasize tmimut. It's not innocence. What it is, they're naked. It means they have no obstacles in their consciousness to entering into an erotic relationship with one another, to becoming one with each other in a sexual relationship, or on another level, to entering into an intimate relationship with God. It's as if they don't have clothes on. Right? Literally, they don't have clothes on. But it's a metaphorical meaning that now it spreads out the meaning from the literal meaning to a certain kind of nakedness that you could say primitive people have. The primitive people of the South Sea Islands, was it Van Gogh or Gauguin, loved to paint the innocence of the sexuality that you can see in the book. You have to be a very simple person, like, for instance, Lahavdil perhaps, the little boy who plays his flute, right? The Hasidic story about the little boy who plays his flute to express his overwhelming love of God. To express his dveikut with God, he is not inhibited in any way. He's naked because of his simplicity, because he's uneducated and unsophisticated and passionate. So he just goes straight into a song of playing the flute, perhaps dubiously mutar, I don't know if you're allowed to do that on Yom Kippur, to express his love of God. And that's taken as a kind of beauty, a certain beauty, which we on the whole no longer have. Because why? Because we have now achieved what we call dat enoshi, a human consciousness. And the first two people in the world were without what we call human consciousness, which seems to mean for him something like self-consciousness. Feeling of always questioning things, calling things into question. Am I right to do this? Am I not right? Whenever I think of a relationship, an intimate relationship, I can't help being affected by memory of other relationships, let's say. I'm got at in various ways. I no longer come like a clean slate to the moment. I don't live in the moment. Sophisticated modern people, and I think it's Kal Vachomer now. Now we live in that very height of dat enoshi. I don't want to say the depths, but the height. It brings certain privileges as well. Hyper-awareness. You've read everything, you know everything, so you can't actually approach anything completely innocent. Even if you are Haredi, you can't. You've been brought up without apparent exposure to the culture of the world, but of course it's come true to you in all kinds of ways. And he says that's the difference. that what happened then, and from then on, it's become a kind of dream vision of human beings. If only we could have that innocence. In Shir HaShirim, yeah, the beloved says to the lover, yeah, Mi yitencha ka'achli. I wish you were like a brother to me. I would meet you outside in public and I would kiss you. Meaning there would be no self-consciousness, there'd be no inhibition, which is caused by our complicatedness. The fact that we have a consciousness. What does it mean to have a consciousness? So it's a kind of mixed blessing. It is a blessing to have a consciousness, but Adam and Chava were in a way, before the sin, they were clean of that. Should we regret it? Shouldn't we regret it? Right? It's a question. Notice what a daring and large and complex idea, and I haven't done it full justice. No, the Hamek Davar has, by noticing that there are two roots, and the Torah is playing with two roots, that there's something slippery in the word lo yitboshash. You can't just look for the one and only authorized translation, because then you'll be cheating yourself of the poetic meanings, associations, as we say. Well, we live with associations. What else is, from advertising to psychoanalysis to the enjoyment of a good poem? It all has to do with that sense of mobility. Okay, so if I move on from this.
I
Yes.
don't understand the late time lag connected to the story, to the Adam story.
To the
Adam and Chava.
Adam and
I
Chava.
don't understand that Boshesh.
Yes, okay, so let me give one example. After he has sinned and God reproaches him, Adam says, you remember that woman you gave me? She gave me the fruit and I did eat. Va'ochel. And some of the commentaries, I think including the Hamek Davar, points out that he's doing two things at the same time when he, in what he's just said. On the one hand, he's passing the buck, not only to the woman, but to God, you notice. It's not even simple, it's a complex other meaning. Your fault. No, why did you mislead me? The Chizkuni actually doesn't take it as a joke. He says, but he's right. Adam had a right to think that God wouldn't mislead him. And if he gave him the woman, and the woman was clearly meant to be a kind of guide for him, that was the understanding, that she wouldn't just be a biological mate, that she would be Ezer connector, then maybe he has some justice in what he's saying. That's an extreme view. But what you notice is, on the one hand, he makes excuses. And on the other hand, he does confess. He does, after all, say, I did eat. So you can't say he just passes the buck. He does what we all do. We always say two things at the same time, at least two. We say, I'm really sorry. Yes, I did that. I'm really sorry. And then we explain it. And when we explain what we did, we are actually getting off. Don't think it was really so bad. It's not. I'm a nice person, actually. I'm being a little banal here, but and that is human consciousness.
And that's the lag.
That's the lag. That's the thinking of the arrière-pensée, as the French call it. The afterthought. What you think later. It's not just I ate because I wanted to eat. It's bringing in the other thoughts you had, which is part of your package. In a way, that's how we. Not so easy to read a text that takes account of that kind of complexity. Yeah. I'm not saying the Torah is the only such text. There are many such texts. We want to look at how the Torah does it. And so finally we can get into Parshat. And I'm going to try to move at a fairly brisk rate. Does anyone have a very visible watch, like a watch that I could see without? Thank you very much. I just have to remember. I'll bring something next week. Yes, that'll be easier.
Wait, but it's a few minutes. It's not exactly.
Yeah,
because
exactly.
I'm time
That's what it is.
challenged. So.
Thank you. Have a look at number 2. We go into the material of Parshat Noah. Ele Toldot Noah. That's the opening of the Parsha. These are the generations of Noah. In other words, the offspring. Toldot. How many of you have Hebrew good enough that you could understand a word like Toldot, for instance? Is that everybody? Not quite. Okay, good. It's good to tell you. Toldot. It comes from the root Yalad. Someone gives birth to, a woman gives birth, and a man is Holid. He causes birth to happen. But then the children are called Toldot, descendants.
Reading.
I'm sorry, I'm reading number 2 on your page. The Sfat Emet. Oh, it's not translated. It's not translated. It's a Sfat Emet. It's a modern Hasidic source. I'm going to just pull out the main point here. Starts by quoting the Zohar. On this expression, these are the children of Noah. And the Zohar says that Noah is not just a human being, but he's almost like an allegorical principle. The idea of resting, Shabbat. He is a Shabbat principle, menucha. It's a Kabbalistic way of thinking. It's a mystical way of thinking. And then he says that, and then leaves it. And then he quotes simply Rashi, who says that the main offspring of the righteous are commandments, fulfillment of commandments, and good deeds. That is, that offspring can be metaphorical as well as literal. They're your children, but the righteous person has other things that she puts out into the world, publishes, takes out of themselves and wants to extend themselves into the world. There is such a desire that I should leave an impact on the world. It's called the creative desire. The desire to, so it's not only children, procreation, but it's also good deeds. It's also ethical. It's an ethical desire, says Rashi. And then our Hasidic master, again, modern, 19th century, goes on. All created things, all creatures need to make offspring. It's a need, it has to happen. Because God has placed in each part of creation an nekuda kadosha, a sacred point. There is a holiness, not only in human beings, notice, in kol hanivraim, all creatures. I don't know if that means only live creatures like animals, or actually everything, trees, stones. There is something that has something to do with consciousness. Now, in the most modern thinking now about consciousness, and I've been following up on a lot of this recently, so my mind is very full of it. Some of the most interesting thinkers, who are very hard to take for the common sense person, have this idea that there's a consciousness is not just in us, but there's a certain kind of consciousness in everything in the world. I won't say more about that now. But here he talks about how then these creatures, bifrat b'nei Adam, all right, so now he's more tangible, especially human beings, right? But he's already said more than that. Especially human beings need to broaden this point of holiness in them. They have a need to expand and extend the holiness that's in them so that it takes more place in the world, to bring it out of themselves. And that's called to make children, to make offsprings, in order that its strength, its koach, should spread out throughout the world. But here is the paradox. Very aware that it's a paradox. These offspring can only happen through the restraint when a human being, for instance, restrains himself in the presence of God and comes to know and understand that in himself he has no strength at all. That is, on the one hand, he has the creative energy. He knows there's something special inside him, and he wants to bring it out and publish it in the world. Bring, whether it's children, or good deeds, or poetry, or any making. After all, the root, the meaning of poetry, comes from the Greek word poesis, which means creation. It means making something happen in the world, making something of the material of the world. But it can only happen here, and this is very challenging, if there is also a kind of counter impulse to withdraw your ego and to bring it back into the center of your being, which is the root of your being, the shoresh, which is God. And to understand that it's God in you that allows you to move out into the world and not your own ego. If your move out into the world is full of ego, then that's not genuine toldot. Somewhere, he doesn't talk about the negative so much. He talks about the positive. And he says that's the nature of tzaddikim. That's what tzaddikim are all about. That's why they have this other kind of, right? But here is a paradox, and he can't get over it. He keeps on repeating it. That the interesting thing is that in all the vigor and explosiveness of creativity, which is in a way irresponsible and free, and if it's valid, it has a certain rigor about it. There's a certain discipline. Even, let's say you bake a cake. You know that if it's a difficult cake, if it's a real prize cake, you know that even though you know how to make it, you could get it wrong. If you're not sufficiently attentive, if you're not using all your senses in some way to pull back if it's going wrong. So there has to be a certain kind of awareness of the root of things, which governs all your creative energy. And then you can get out and do it. Again, the French have a nice expression. They're very good for fine feelings. Reculer pour mieux sauter. Pulling back in order to leap forward, the better. When you really want to leap, Eastern martial arts and so on, you concentrate yourself first. You don't just flop outwards. There's certain what allows you to chop with one chop into a brick with one movement of your. Have you ever seen it? Right. That's not a wild chop. That's I've seen close up people doing it. Amazing. So that's the big tool he's talking about. And there's a paradox that we have somewhere. That's what Noach is all about. The story of Noach and the flood is all about creativity and pulling back. Because it's about something that's going to be the most important thing now when the world is to be recreated. And the story of the flood begins with a tragic note, on a tragic note. The tragic note is, and this is already at the end of last week's Parshat, God sees and he regrets. He sees everything that he has made and he regrets. He changes his mind that he made Adam. There's something about the human being and the human being's relation to creation. That's what it is, okay? Which means that the human being has an overwhelming effect on the universe and changes God's mind about it being a good idea to create a human being. In other words, God thought it was a good idea. And then he realized now that is highly anthropomorphic. That kind of language you won't find so often after this Parshat. It'll be much attenuated later. We will find it. A certain kind of language, call it mythic language. I want to call it poetic language. It's a way of thinking about God in order to think about how God thinks. To imagine that God has a mind and thoughts in which, for instance, and this is the extraordinary thing, the most extraordinary thing I can focus on, is that first expression that's used, you don't have, please do bring a chumash with you when you come, because I'll be referring to various verses. I hope you'll be able to understand anyway, but so here I'm looking at Parak Vav, verse Vav, yes, 6. God changed his mind by Yinachem Hashem ki asai ha'adam ba'aretz, that he made the human being on the earth. Vayit'atzev el libo. And he, literal translation, immediate translation from the root etzev, okay, to be sad. He became sad. It's not a general state. It's like suddenly he felt extremely sad. Vayit atse. Now that's a very human experience. It's such an intimate experience. Suddenly I felt a great sadness because something I believed in up to now has failed. My creation, the work of my hands, which is Adam particularly. Did God make Adam with his hands? Can we say that? That's a poetic expression. Do we have any authority for saying that in the text? Did God have hands in the text? Did he make Adam with his hands? Yes. Yeah. Chapter 2, verse 5, something like that. I want to look it up. What do we read there? But a bit later, a couple of verses later. And we read there that by Yitzer Hashem Elokim et ha'adam, out of him God formed man, like you might say like a sculptor, or like a ceramicist, works with clay. That's better. Using the dust of the earth, the dry dust of the earth, moistened by the rains that had just descended. That's what I'm calling a mythic story. It's a story suddenly of the sense of what he has in his hands, and the Midrash goes ahead without any inhibition, and Rashi quotes and says, like this baker, not even talking about an artist anymore, like this craftsman, a baker, who makes a beautiful challah by forming the loaf out of dough. Just takes the dough, which is a mixture of flour and water, and suddenly that's the image for God. That's what God is doing. And there's even a source somewhere that says man is the challah of the world. What a wonderful metaphor. He was the fresh-baked challah of the world, with all that comes with one's satisfaction when one has produced such a thing. Yes, I used to once upon a time. Now I make sure, and some people can do both, but I'm not, limited mind. So there was, and God is very pleased. Tov ma'od. This is very good. He only says it after man was created. You remember the other days before, he just said, Tov, it's good. Comes the sixth day, it's Tov ma'od. Because
Was that after men and women?
I'm sorry,
Was it after, only after man, not
only
women?
after man was created.
But what about the women?
Oh, that man, woman, the human. Sorry, you're right. The
Not
human,
curious.
who is then still in the course of the sixth day divided up
Okay.
into the two of them.
Thank you, I'm sorry.
Thank you. No, you're right. You're right. I'm still old-fashioned enough to be unaware of these things, but I don't particularly justify it. There we are. So, all right. What was God doing before he made this world? You want to have a really mythological midrash? Have a look at number 4. Number 4, Rishik Rabbi. Rabbi Abahu said, how do we know that God created worlds and destroyed them? HaKadosh Baruch Hu borei olamot u'machrivam. What is God doing all the time? He's creating and destroying. As if creating and destroying are part of the same act. That in order to create, you have to destroy. Could that be part of the meaning here? Let's just finish and see what is said here. Until he made the world as we have it now, these creatures. And then he said, these I like. Those I didn't like. And it's put here, the word is hana'ah. Meaning it's not those were evil and this is good. It's not an ethical judgment. It's almost a matter of taste. God is looking at the work of his hands. And he's saying, this time, yes. This works. Which is just the way a creative person thinks. You try and you're trying, you're not happy. So you keep trying. So you keep scrunching it up, right? You throw it into the wastebasket, what you just written, all the poems that you didn't like. And then he said, and how do we know that? That extraordinary idea, where do we get that from? From the text. It says, and And God saw everything he had made. That means all those worlds. Everything, it's a different meaning now. It's from our usual understanding of everything he had made. It includes now other worlds that we haven't read about. The past. God has a consciousness that goes back to the past, goes on to the future. Human consciousness is like God's, more than like Adam and Chava. Do you see what I mean? Adam and Chava are not so much like God in not having a past, not having a future. They are born into human consciousness when they sin. But God has this large consciousness. Right? It's a bit complex. And so he looks at everything he has been doing, creating, destroying, until he accepts this version. And he says, yes, very good. And now he changes his mind again. So you have a very volatile God. Which,
Can I say something?
I'm sorry.
Sorry, I am in the Zoom. Can I say something? I just wanted to say that the same movement that you were just describing of God making things and waiting, and this was not good, and this was not good, and this is good. This is the same movement that we see in the creation of Chava, when he brought all the animals to Adam, and he said this was not good, and this one's not good. And when Chava was created, he said, "Zot apam etzem ha'atzamai ubasar mibsari lezot tikra isha ki mi'ish lokach hazot," which says this is good. Now it's good. This time it's good. It's the same.
Very much. First of all, I like that very much. From now on, can you please hold these interesting comments? I only want boring questions in the course of the class. That is, if you didn't understand something. But hold the interesting ones for the end, okay? Who was that?
Lilach.
Lilach.
My name is Lilach.
Thank you. Okay, so you got that. Yeah. So somewhere that's the nature of creativity. To reject versions, to say no, not that. And then to change your mind again. And that is the creativity of God in creating human beings. And there's something now that human beings have to take on in themselves when they think of creating, of the offspring of human beings and what people put out into the world. They also have to face this creative, destructive part of themselves. How do I go about doing good things in the world? Putting out good things around me. Maybe it won't be a simple act. Maybe it'll mean a lot of zigzagging and changing one's mind. And all right, let's see where we go from here. I wanted to think about the word itzavon very briefly. Vayit'atzev el libo. And God was saddened. Rashi will say that means God mourned the loss of the work of his hands. Nitzabel al ovdan ma'aseh yadav. Not forgetting the yadayim, the hands, God's hands. He was mourning the loss of the work of his hands. You can see it. You can see it in number 3, section 3, paragraph 3. No, not paragraph 3, paragraph 4. I'm sorry, the last one. Daled. 3 Daled. And he was saddened to his heart. He mourned the loss of the work of his hands. In other words, he's mourning the human world, before he's actually destroyed it. Right? Usually you mourn afterwards. After death is mourning. So what does it mean to mourn the loss of your creation? It's to throw it into you mourn it before you throw it into the wastebasket. Because what have you lost? Not just a piece of paper. You've lost a vision. You've lost a hope, a way of thinking of things, that this is going to be it. And you have to give it up. And I want to say that the word itzavon is used several times in these early chapters of the Torah. And always it has that meaning. And it's an unusual word. It's not the same as etzev. Etzev is just sadness. But that more sophisticated, more refined idea of itzavon, and let's point out what we have here. For instance, in number 3, it's all in number 3. The first part, Aleph, God says to Chava, when he is punishing her, he says, Harba arbe et esponech. I will greatly increase your itzavon. With sa'ar til dibanim. In pain, you shall give birth to children. No, I'm sorry, but Etzef Chaldi Banim. Right. There are three different categories here, but Etzef comes later. What is Sardi Tol Banim? You see it there, number one. It's the pain of raising children, not the obvious physical pain of giving birth. That is Etzef. And it's not the difficulties of pregnancy. That is Haronet, that's the tsar of. There are three different categories of pain. But the first one is the purest mourning. It's what's the pain of raising children without being too melancholy about it, with all the joy.
They have to leave you.
It's what?
They have to leave you.
They have to leave you.
You know that.
And in fact, they've left you before they've left you. They're different from you. You had a vision when you had them of how they were going to be an expression of the best parts of you. They were going to carry you triumphantly out into the world. And it turns out they have their own versions of what their life is going to be like. They turn things around. They liked what you gave them. They didn't like what you gave them, but they make something else of it. And so the parents, it's a pain to realize that the child has, in a simple word, bechira chofshi. That's theological expression of it. Free choice. A human being has free choice. And the basic expression of that is that you are toldot. What came out of you is just uncontrollable. Can take on any shape that you can't control anymore. You get the first 7 years according to one educationist, but that's already, I think, a lot. 7 years to form a child. And Etzef then has something of the idea, poetic again, of la'atsev. You don't have to accept this, but I like it. To atsev is to design. To design. You had a design. You had a plan for what you were going to create. And part of the creative instinct is that sense of, I know what I want. I have a sense of what I want. And then the disappointment, as one realizes, by what someone calls the bitter logic of the poetic principle, that you will never be totally satisfied with what you have produced. Well, never maybe is too strong. I never like never, because it, again, forecloses on realities and possibilities. I'm sure there are some cases where one feels perhaps even greater joy. But nevertheless, that particular rather egoistic and narcissistic desire, which is the original creative desire, I am going to make me and put it there in the world. That has to undergo a little education. There's a little disappointment there. Again, the same idea in the second part of number 3. Bet, this is Rashi, when God is punishing Adam, he says, you shall eat of the grass of the field, of the vegetation of the field. And Rashi says, what kind of curse is that? We already heard it as a blessing. Look, I'm giving you all the grass of the field, all the vegetation of the field, which produces seed for you to eat. That's not bad news. But what do we have here in this pasuk? Cursed be the ground for your sake, because of you. V'itzavon tochlena. You shall eat the product of the ground in itzavon, not etzev, itzavon. And what is itzavon? Rashi explains from his sources, you will sow all kinds of good produce, all the great stuff that you want to base your healthy diet on, all the terrific things that you can let grow in the ground. And what the earth will produce for you will be kotz v'dardar. That's going very far. Thorns and thistles. There is such a thing as unsuccessful plantings. There is such a thing, and it's part of the process of planting that you may be disappointed. It's not totally under your control. So there's the same idea there. And then finally, number 3, right, Gimel. All right, you can see it there. When Noach is born, his father Lemach calls him Noach. Why? Ve'yinachamenu me'itzvon yadenu, mima'asenu ume'itzvon yadenu. This one will comfort us for our creative acts, ma'asenu, for the sadness of our hands. That our hands will have to experience dissolution, disappointment. We've been living in that state all the time since Adam and Chava, but Noah, he's going to redeem us from that apparently human fate. It's one disappointment. How does he do that? According to Rashi, according to the Midrash, we're going all over the place now. Suddenly, the idea that Noah invented the plow, Machrisha, Lachrosh, which is to design something. It means to write, to inscribe, to create. Lachrosh is, what's the word I really want? It's like writing or engraving, so that it's palpable. Yes, the plow engraves the earth. You can see where the plow has been. It's writing on the earth. And it's a necessary act. And I want to think now for a few minutes about what's so important about it. Why does Noah's father think that'll be the end of all that suffering? What does the plow actually do? So according to this Rashi, this Midrash, Noah is the first technological inventor. Before that, what did we have? We had the suffering of our hands, the laborious work of our hands in the earth, doing what we know has to be done in the earth, which is turning the earth over. And that's what a plow will do when Noah has the ingenuity to invent a mechanism that can extend his hands, that can extend the power of his hands. Now a plow is seen as a loving expression, a more useful expression of the loving work of the hands, not the cold technology which commits violence against human life, but the warm technology that extends the power of our hands to shape reality so that it'll be easier for human beings to live in the world. Noah was slated to do that. According to other sources, it may be very interesting in terms of what the anthropologists have said. It may be that up to that point, the human hand, was like a mitt. There was no separation between the fingers. It was just thumb. It's called the opposing. And this is therefore a stage in the development of civilization. That human beings, once they could open their fingers, then they could do much more in the way of handling material and turning it over and kneading the dough and turning the earth over. And the culmination of that was to invent the plow. So then I think that many technological inventions have exactly that purpose, to extend the use of the hand and to overcome the limitations of an actual physical hand, so that you don't get so much disappointment. So that, in fact, you can have your hand, for instance, can now, very simple form of technology, can now handle very hot things and shape very hot things. Why? Because you have an asbestos glove, very simple, or tongues, that you hold tongues. These are ways of reducing the limitations of the hand, making your hand more effective out into the world. Elaine Scarry, who's a contemporary philosopher, gives a whole list of her suggestions about this, how the body seeks to extend itself out into the world, its power. For instance, she says, even the pencil. When I have a pencil, right, a simple little implement, I can write on paper. And therefore, people who are not here with me now can know what was in me, what came out of me. I don't have to just think it or speak it to people who are, I can actually write it. It can go on, it can go to people at the other end of the world. Generations later, we'll be able to read the work of my hands. The poet Keats, John Keats, beautifully said in one of his great poems. He said this, yes, this is the expression, the phrase, when this warm scribe at my hand is in the grave, then you will hold it, future reader. That's already not Keats. Yeah. You will hold the paper in your warm hand. Basically, he's saying ideas no longer are as temporary and as fragile as they once used to be. That primitives, all they could do was at best speak what they were thinking. That was already an achievement. No, I can write it down from my warm hand. This is not a mechanical hand. This is an erotic hand, meaning it's a hand that's loving, that's connective, that touches things in the world, like the hand that makes dough and that makes beautiful objects, right? It changes in some way the perhaps impersonal decrees of life, so to make things work for you in a warm and caring way. Now, the plow is a major example of that. So now let's follow the plow. First thing in the history of the plow, Noah may have invented the plow, but when it came already to the story of the flood, we read right at the beginning of this, we're still at the beginning of Parshat Noah. God says to Noah, I'm going to destroy them, that is all human beings, all life, et haaretz. You can see it there. With the earth. That is, I'll destroy the earth as well as human beings. And Rashi reads in a very close way. It's a beautiful reading. The second part there, davar acher, another reading. Et haaretz means with the land. The earth was destroyed together with the human being. How much of the earth? The whole earth didn't disappear in the flood. I mean, there was a huge flood there, but how deep into the earth was disintegrated by the flood? And lots of water was poured on the dust of the earth. A certain amount of water, and you can sculpt things and make things, beautiful things. Too much water, everything disintegrates. Everything just becomes liquid. How deep into the earth did the flood, the water penetrate? Why should we be interested in this? And Rashi says here, the depth of the plow, the 3 meters, someone has observed how deep the plow goes into the earth and then turns over the undersoil and brings it out on top. Those 3 meters are lost in the flood. As if to say that what is lost is not just human life. It's that creative reach of the human mind, of the human imagination, the hand, which then becomes a plow, or that way of relating to the earth, which in a way is a loving way. It's not an exploitative way. It doesn't deal with exploitations. It deals with what the earth needs. What happens when you have all kinds of old rubble over the face of the earth, which nothing will grow in that. Come the worms, I can't resist this. The earthworms, that's what Darwin noticed. Darwin wrote extraordinary articles about the minuscule aspects of nature that are like plows before there ever was a plow, he says. The earthworms are probably the most important event in the creation because they do precisely that in a way that's a little bit embarrassing. It's not exactly noble. What do? They eat up earth and some vegetation, and some stones, and then they excrete. They come out onto the surface of the earth and they excrete, and you have your lovely rich topsoil then on which you can plant. Now that's a turning over, moving from one place to the other, and the worm already does it, and then the plow of course does it better. And in Darwin's time, there's a general sense of pessimism. about the continuation of the world. That is, the world is going to come to an end. It was believed then, they did their scientific calculations, that the sun was burning out. That there was no, so this solar heat was going to cease, and we would all just die, not of water this time, but of heat. That was, and Darwin is in a way offering this kind of comfort, saying yes, but it's not in the sun only that you see meaning. You can also see meaning in the worm, in the very Kitolat Yaakov. Again, I can't resist this, because Yaakov is a worm. Yeshayahu calls Yaakov, us in other words, worms. In what sense? Kikoho befeh. Because the strength of a worm is in its mouth, meaning the oral strength to eat, right? To take in material and process it so that it becomes fertile. That's what human beings do with their mouths. It's a bit far-fetched, but not terribly. We're moving along a certain line of, and then have a look now at this important message. What about prayer? Prayer is like this too. Prayer is using words that turn over the reality of fate and changing God's mind in the other direction. Have a look at it in number 6. Amar Rabbi Yitzchak. Why is the prayer of the righteous compared to a plow? A strange question. Was it compared to a plow? The basis of the question is that when Yitzchak, you remember, prays for his wife, Rivka, to have children, she is barren. There's no question about it. Akara. There's no way out of it. It's fate. Zerah. And he is plowing something. That's because the root of atar, ayin tafresh, is a plow or a pitchfork, which does the same thing, which goes down deep in under. And so the Midrash takes this seriously, this word in the Torah, vaye'etar, which means to pray, and thinks of its metaphoric level, but it has more meaning than just the word pray. We're not going to get at the experience of prayer unless we take on board the idea of a plow. We have to imagine it in some way. How can it affect God? Just as the plow turns over the produce from one place to another, so the prayers of the righteous turn over God's attributes from the attribute of ragzanut, of anger, of strict justice, to the attribute of compassion. So that God changes position. I want to use the word makom, from one place to another. What does it mean to say that God changes? In Kabbalah, God has many midot. He has many ways of being. And that can cause us, again, if we are not poetically inclined, some trouble. What do you mean God is one and he doesn't change and he doesn't have all kinds of complicated bits and pieces of himself that, sometimes one is in control and there's something about it that we find awkward, it's too slippery. So we want something solid. But these midrashim and these ways of reading the text say no, but nothing is solid. When you come to these things, right? You can never learn, only if you want to learn how to build one, do you need clear instructions. If you're dealing with God, that's at the opposite end of the spectrum. And God is someone who takes up different positions, different versions of himself. Version is from the root meaning to turn. But God turns himself to different ends. Sometimes he thinks something is tov ma'od, because the atmosphere of the world is such that it cries out tov ma'od. It's very good what's going on here. And other times it cries out rak rak. It's only evil. Oh, I get pins and needles when I, and that's a situation that we hope never happens. But it's almost as if God is not active in this. He is not just condemning the world in such a situation. He is the world is part of him. Everything, the world, it's a kind of hologram. That sort of idea, that the whole is reflected in all the parts. midat hadin, midat harachamim. And the prayer of the righteous is like a plow. It can go down into the past and bring up good things from the past that moderate the difficulty of what's on the surface, that kind of thing. Like poetry. Who makes that analogy? The Russian poet, Josip Mandelstam. I'll just read one sentence from him where he says this. He says, sometimes there are times when mankind craves like that mankind is dissatisfied with its today and yearns today, yearning yearning for the deep layers of time. I can't understand my own notes. But yearning for the deep layers of time craves like a plowman for the virgin soil of time. In other words, very simply, what is the poet doing in terms of language? He's not satisfied with the language and the meanings that you can see on the surface. You look around you everywhere and you don't like the banal meanings that you see. It may be true up to a point, what you're seeing. It's just not rich enough. You can't plant anything in it. Nothing will grow out. And so the poet goes down into the depths and brings up stuff to moderate what's, brings it up, and it helps them to change the whole surface. And now you can plant. And that's the power of tefillah, and it's the power of poetry. I'm drawing the two together. Yeah. And with this, the idea then would come up that the human being has this power. His main power, in fact, is the power of prayer. What is it that God wants of the righteous that is redemptive? There is really nothing else that God wants of the righteous. All right, God wants the good produce of the righteous, the toldot, that he puts out good things into the world. But it's then boiled down to something very specific. Hashem mitzaveh le tfilatam shel tzadikim. God desires, very strong word, the prayers of the righteous. There is something about prayer that God wants, because that has the power to change, bring up the depths of things, to change the surface. I'm trying to think of an example too, because in case I have the feeling that maybe some people are not too clear what I'm talking about. I can't see the people on screen, but I'm trying to pick up vibrations here. Let me say, I haven't thought about it too much. Right? Things are bad between a husband and a wife. There's a relationship that's really going up very badly. And everything that's said just adds fuel to the fire. It's just really not good. And you get a feeling that it's finished. There's nothing to say. In a way, that's what God says to Noah. Noah doesn't pray. And he's criticized for not praying. God says to him, make an ark. He says to him, the world is coming to an end. So you make an ark and save yourself and your family and a small specimen of all the creatures in the world. And Noah does exactly what God tells him. And he's criticized for it in the Zohar. Thinking again of the Torah as poetry. And you think you understood the Torah? That when it says he obeyed God, and he did exactly what God said, that's in praise of Noah. He obeyed God, isn't that good? No. There are situations in which you should be thinking about alternative possibilities. You should be bringing up things from the depths to change the face of reality, even if it feels impossible. So in terms of our unfortunate couple who are having trouble with each other, maybe it means, taking a break from each other and allowing other memories to come up. Go away and bake a cake or something. Go away and do something else. It'll put you in a different place. And then maybe you'll remember something good. It's very hard to find something good to say about this man, but you'll come back and you'll say, and that's how you, in a way, it's amazing the power of that. Both things are true. You can't say the other thing wasn't true. But suddenly this has an amazing power, what you just brought up. And that's a movement from one place to the other. And that's the power of prayer. And that's what God wants of the righteous. Noah didn't do it. He's criticized by the Zohar. And God even says to him, to Moshe, who does do it, when the people are in trouble with the golden calf, God says to Moshe, "V'ata hanichani." Now just let me be. Just let me be. Listen to the word Noach in there. "Ata hanichani." Just let things go. And I'll destroy everybody. There, it's explicit. I'll destroy everybody, this people, and I'll make a whole new people out of you. Isn't that a magnificent idea for Moshe's ego? You know, it's very tempting. It'll all come from me now. And Moshe refuses, and he prays. And the way this is read in the Zohar, it's extraordinary, is God is saying to Moshe, Noach me, and just obey me, let the world be destroyed. And Moshe picks up on the ambiguity of what God is saying. And he says, but if I do that, then people will say that I have destroyed Israel, like Noach. In other words, I understand that in the depths, that's not a good idea. Just to let you be and not say my say. That's really not a good idea. And God is in a way been hinting that to him. He doesn't want you to take it literally sometimes when he says things. So there again, it's a disturbing idea. We like to believe everything that God said can be understood very simply, most simple level. Maybe not. Maybe God is more than a very simple being. There's more going on here. And I want to finish now very quickly by thinking about what happens in the ark. When he's in the ark, he's in a kind of spaceship, I would almost say. Right? The way of imagining what the ark was. It means that he is there in the alien medium of the waters. You can't live there for very long. And he's safe inside the spaceship, but it's a very artificial safety. You know, what does it take to stay in a spaceship? Safe, be able to breathe, and be able to move, and so on. Lots of technology. The main characteristic of being in the ark, God says to Noah, Bo el hateva, come into the ark, you and your sons, and your wife and your daughters. What does God mean when he's saying that? Again, the Midrashic reading is coming into this box, living in a box for a year. I think it's a year, 12 months. It's a long time to be in a spaceship. Means that you will have no relations with your wife. No sexuality, no sexual expression, no children being born, no building of the world. Why not? You can't build the world when God is in the process of destroying it. That's the way the Midrash puts it. This is a time of God's destruction, and that's part of the larger story of creation. Now there is destruction. Don't pretend you haven't noticed, and pretend to yourself that this bubble that you're living in is really creation. It's not. The bubble is, the spaceship is part of space. It's an alien thing in space, and you can't spend the rest of your life there. But when God then says to Noah, "Tsei min hateva," go out of the ark at the end of this time, what he really means is, again, hinted in what God says then, go out of the ark, you and your wife. Interesting arena for applying the idea of going into the ark and going out of the ark. But what does it really mean to you? It means returning to the world of waters. Returning to a world in which there is solid earth and there is water, which, if in the right amount, you can shape things, you can make things, you can make children, you can make love. Too much water, and there will be wildness. Everything will fall apart. Nothing will make sense. Nothing will have. That's a dangerous world. And Noah refuses to leave the ark. according to the Midrash that you can see in number 9. Yes. In this Midrash, let's have a look at it quickly. Midrash starts by saying, for everything there is a time and a season for everything under the heavens. That's from the book of Kohelet. There was a time for Noah to go into the ark, to withdraw, to gather himself into a kind of monastic existence, to consider his connection with God, perhaps even to become like God in relation to others in the ark. As it says, come into the ark, you and your family, into the ark. And there is a time for him to leave the ark, as it says, go out of the ark. What is this like? This is like a parnas, someone who's in charge of a certain group of people, as an administrator, who left his place, the place of this job, and then put someone else in instead of him to a substitute for his place, for his work. Then he came back to him and says, now leave your place. And he's talking to the substitute. Leave this place, which originally was mine and which you have now got used to thinking of as yours. And when that happens, what is this metaphor suggesting? We could skip a line there. When God came and said to Noah, after he put Noah in God's place inside the ark. It's a very interesting way of telling the story. Who is Noah inside the ark? He's in solitary grandeur. There he is in perfect control of all that life. He's in a kind of godlike position. He is feeding all the animals. That's what he does all day long, according to Midrashic stories. He's very kind, very loving, but he is not involved in the complexities of human relations, of being a human being who's on the same level as your wife and who has to have intimate relations with her. They're separated out. God doesn't have those relations. Noah doesn't have those relations. There's something clean and antiseptic about life and omnipotent about life in the ark. No complications. And so he's not so keen to live. And he says, if I do as you say, if I leave the ark, which now doesn't just mean going down off the gangplank. It means restore relations with my wife and everyone else too. Then that could turn out to be for a curse. We've already seen it. Having children, sometimes the children don't turn out well. And it hasn't turned out well when it created the flood. It's too risky. I'd rather just remain in solitary grandeur. And this is a way of refusing, right? It's refusing to think. Now, in the last 5 minutes, I want to introduce this concept, which I already had in a way. How does a man like Noah need to think? Is he just going to accept fatalistically a certain way of being in which he's safe, in which nothing can at least be cursed, but there's no particular life? And he's not turning anything over. It's kind of static. That's the way it is. And so there's no prayer. That's basically what it means. There is no prayer. So have a look now at number 10. That's what it means, not to relinquish his godlike place. To become a human being would mean to pray. Have a look at number 10. God spoke to Noah saying, go out of the ark. And then the Midrash brings a quotation from somewhere else, from the book of Psalms. On the basis of the word go out, say, Hotzia mimasger nafshi. Take my life out of its closedness. I'm in a locked-in condition. This is the psalmist praying to God, get me out of here. I'm living in a constrained, unvital way. And there the psalmist is asking to be released from that closed-in situation. And the end of the pasuk is lehodot et shemcha. In order to give thanks to your name. In order to give thanks to your name. That's the psalmist. Nothing to do with Noah. The Midrash now comes and connects the two verses. Why? Because of the word say. Go out of the ark. Already we know that's very widely understood in the Midrash, that it doesn't just mean walk off the gangplank. That there's also the possibility of it meaning something about your sexual, relational existence to other people in the world, how you are to live out your life in relation to women, right? All the emotional infrastructure of human thinking, the way I think in the world is affected by these things. And so the Midrashist here connects with that pasuk. And what does it suggest now? God couldn't have instructed Noah to leave the ark and go back into that world of versions and of changings and of turnings over. If there hadn't been something in Noah himself that had wanted it. God doesn't come to someone who really wants totally to live a sterile, safe, omnipotent position and tell him, no, I want you out of here. There had to be something in Noah that was really praying to God, praying for a prayer. I'd like to put it like that since I have to finish right here. Praying to pray, or the idea that you find in mystical sources, very importantly, the desire to desire, which means that there is something, you're not made of whole cloth. I have decided I am against marriage, I'm against relationships, I'm against exchange with other people, that may be in theory what you decided, but there's always something. There's something in you that is not satisfied. It's in the depths of you. There's something else. And so there's a prayer, let that develop. Allow the world, and including myself, to develop that into an actual prayer, which would mean, in effect, to do what God wants. God responds to that. God can't put that into his mind. It has to be a response from something human. So there's that attunement between God and the human. God moves to Rahmanut and says, I'll never again make a flood. Is it God's idea that there shouldn't be no more floods? Or does that have something to do with a change in human beings? That human beings also have second thoughts about their immediate desires. They've learned now to control their immediate desires. And once a human being exercises restraint, then the human being can think a God who is capable also of saying, I did that, I brought a flood, and I'm never going to do that again. Somewhere it's thinkable, as if in the end, and I'm just trying to say this as briefly as I can, as if in the end, it's really true. The Torah is not about God as something separate from human beings, as a phenomenon that is absolute. It's about God in relation to human beings. How do people think God? What do people make of what God says in the Torah? God doesn't say things that are completely mysterious to what human beings think, on the one hand, and he doesn't say things that are so obvious that we don't have to think about them at all. Somewhere, God exists. This is what secularists say, I have to say, yeah. What atheists say. They say God didn't create human beings created God. You know that one. Yeah. We like it, we don't like it, there's a whole range of possibilities. We don't like it on the whole because it's not said in a pleasant spirit. But there's some truth to it. It means the Torah is language. It's a certain kind of language in which God speaks, but that's not an absolute, it's not cut in stone in that sense. It's something fluid. How do you take it? How do you interpret it? And if you interpret well and fruitfully, then you will know it. You'll know that God is thinking Tov Ma'od. Somewhere there, and God is saying never again. Because you will have enough in yourself of that kind of God. You'll be able to take on that kind of God. If you are fatalistic about God, then it's absence, nothing doing, fate, and no prayers and no nothing, then that's bad. That is a way of creating a fatalistic state of things. So it's that tension within human beings in the work of their hands, of our hands. The work of our hands, most importantly, is our way of thinking, our way of imagining, seems to me. Each one is different. Each person is different. It's very complicated. You know, it's not a Pollyanna story. People can have all kinds of thoughts about God, and should perhaps deal with all the thoughts that come up from those depths, so long as there's some thread of connection. And the thread of connection is called tefillah, which is a kind of desire. It's a kind of wanting more life rather than less life. I think we have to stop there. Yes.
Wow.
I think probably, I hope it'll be a little less mysterious next week. But we started at the most mysterious end. In this kind of mythic, these mythic stories. As we get closer to the world of the Torah, of the Avot, things change somewhat. I have to
Thank you.
acknowledge I didn't leave time for questions. I'm sorry, I said I wouldn't. I must